So finally I got around to reviewing this sword here, the Hanway Tinker Longsword. It's designed by Michael Pierce, who goes by the name of Tinker, a well-known and very skilled sword maker who is now semi-retired, as he puts it. And it's produced by Hanway, also known as Siberia. And it's modeled after the Oakshot Type 18A, 18 as a Roman number. And this type of blade apparently was very popular back then. It was the most widely used type between 1410 and 1510 in all parts of Europe. And as you can see, this is the blunt version. They also have a sharpened version, but I went for the blunt because I was going to use it for sparring. If you see any green reflections, that's my green screen over there. The wall is actually real, but my green screen cloth is over there. But anyway, who cares? It has a scent stopper pommel, as you can see, flat, and normally it has a leather wrap, which I actually have here, but it had a tendency to come loose, and so I eventually just ripped it off entirely. And now I'm going to glue it back on more securely, but before I do that I wanted to show you what it looks like underneath. So you have the wooden core and string wrapping on top. I don't quite see why they put both the string and the leather on it, because you can't really tell. I mean, the string doesn't really give much of a texture to it. It's really mostly just flat. So if I put it on there, you see it's not really, doesn't really make any difference. It's kind of the reverse of what I've seen Albion do, where they glue the leather wrap directly on the wood core and then wrap it with string just to compress it and hold it in place, and afterwards they remove the string, and then it looks as if it was string wrapped because you still have the indentations. The hilt is assembled with a nut, and I'm going to disassemble it to show you. Generally I'm not a fan of a threaded construction, but in this case I can definitely see the practical use of it, because it's in order to make a peened construction which is sturdy enough to hold up to all that use, you know, repeated vibration and impact on there, that would be quite pricey. So this is pretty much the best, cheaper solution you can have, and also it has the advantage that you can retighten it if the need arises. So you can see right there, there's the thread, and it's just the entire tang is one piece. So it's not welded on there, it's really just threaded, and you know, pretty thick. No, I don't see any problem there. The grip is also shaped in such a way that it sits on there pretty tight. The gap between the guard and the tang is not very large, but it's still only on there loosely, so it's not, you know, hammered onto the blade. So in other words, it does rely on compression of the grip to hold the entire thing together. The blade is made of 5160 spring steel, which is a very common choice for swords. It's a very tough steel. The hardness is 50 to 53 HRC, which seems fine for, you know, blade on blade contact. This one here looks really chewed up simply because I've been using it against this sword here, the Dark Sword Fitter, and this one here is a lot harder apparently. And in fact, this was one of the complaints that people had, that it's so hard that it chips more easily. So this is actually something that they planned on changing. So that's where my suspicion is, that the reason why this is so chewed up is mainly because the other one is that much harder. Because from the reviews that I've seen and what other people think about it, and from their tests, it does not seem to get anywhere near as much damage as this one. I've also on several occasions used this for PEL practice, where I was repeatedly striking and thrusting at a steel core tire, which is pretty heavy duty. It does not loosen up much. One thing to note is the grip is rather small, which suits me personally very well because I have relatively small hands. But if you have large hands, this may feel a bit odd to you. This would probably feel very thin to you. What I do definitely like very much is the shape. You can see it's rectangular but beveled at the edges, which is, in my opinion, pretty much the best shape for a sword grip, because it allows you to feel very well where the edge is. In this case, it's not really that necessary because it's for practice anyway, so you don't want to cut your partner, of course, but it still helps with the technique to, you know, feel the orientation properly. The pommel is also very well fitted and has a mirror polish, as you can see. You can see the camera, and it's just, the shape is flawless. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the entire sword. I did not see any flaw at all from the factory, you know, no uneven lines or grind marks or anything like that. So that's quite impressive, especially for the price range. The cross guard, as you can see, also has a mirror polish, which does scratch up. It seems like a bit of an odd choice to me to do that on a sword like this. Again, they also offer the sharp version, which is identical. So in that case, yeah, people are generally fond of the mirror polish, it seems. But it will scratch up more, of course, than a satin polish. The fuller is also very consistent. Nice and straight. It's, at the same time, however, it's not this, you know, 100% perfect factory look. Like, for instance, here you can see it's you know, just slightly off. So it gives it, you know, almost a bit more of a hand finished look. Not quite, because you can't see hammer marks or anything. As far as the flexibility is concerned, flexibility on a practice blade is, of course, always a compromise. You don't want it to be too flexible. If it's outright whippy, then it just won't handle right and a lot of the techniques won't work. But at the same time, you don't want it to be too stiff, because that would make it unsafe for use against your training partner. Generally, if you swing it around like this in the direction of the flat and it just keeps whipping like that, that's way too flexible, which this one does not. I think this here is about right in terms of flexibility. Okay, onto the handling, and here is where this sword really shines. In one word, awesome. I'm very impressed with how it handles, especially considering the price, because a lot of the swords in, you know, sub $300 range, or even slightly above, a lot of them are simply too heavy. And this one here is very nice. I mean, it weighs 1.32 kilos, or 2 pounds and 14 ounces, so almost 3 pounds. And the point of balance seems just right on a sword of this type and with that weight. There are long swords with a point of balance a little closer to the guard, but considering the weight of the sword, this seems just right, so that you still get enough cutting power. There were some lighter medieval longswords, there were also heavier ones, so this is about average. It feels extremely light in the hand. I mean, it's just, it moves pretty much on its own, it's effortless. When throwing a cut, you can very easily stop it and you can change direction easily. This just really moves extremely fast. And it's just a pleasure to handle in general. And the assembly is really sturdy. It held up very nicely, no problem. I don't have to retighten this very often. Compared to the other one, this here is really not an issue. I'd say maybe every second or third practice session, whereas some swords you have to tighten after every practice, some even multiple times throughout. Onto the scabbard. It's a wood core with leather cover. And it fits the sword very well. I only have one issue with it. And that is, as you will hear, that's not good. A sword is not supposed to make this typical movie shing sound. That's not good. And the reason is there is a sharp metal edge here. And that's a problem. It would be a lot better if the mouth of the scabbard itself did not have metal, but just wood or leather. This is just... If this was a sharp blade, this would be a big problem because you would basically keep dulling it as you pull it out. I mean, you even have on the edges here, you do have a sharp corner there. You can see a little bit of leather there, but it just wouldn't be enough. This here would just keep scraping against the edge, and that's very bad. That's the one thing that I'm really displeased with. Otherwise, the scabbard seems okay. I mean, it's not amazing, but it fits it well enough. If I hold it upside down, it does slowly slide out, so it doesn't fit well enough to really securely hold it in there. But then again, considering this metal piece is probably a good thing. And the only other thing that I wish was added would be a belt attachment. Even if it's just a simple loop, that would be kind of nice. But as it is, you would have to attach that yourself. So overall, this sword really impressed me, especially for the price. I think I got it for 215. I'm going to post the prices as well as the other measurements, length, width, things of that nature, down there in the video description, and also links to where you can find it. The things that I'm a bit displeased with are mostly minor, with one exception. The minor things to recap are that the grip wrap just comes loose too easily. I guess the glue that they used is just not strong enough, or looking at it, I think the problem is mainly that they were a bit too stingy, didn't use enough glue. The scabbard is too scrapey, like I mentioned. And yeah, you should keep in mind that the grip is very narrow and thin, which for smaller hands is perfect, larger ones maybe not so. My biggest complaint about this really for practice is the tip. It is rounded off and doesn't look too bad, but this without proper protective gear and ideally a rubber blunt on there, this is still a bit too dangerous. I mean, if you were to thrust at someone with enough force, this may still enter the body, especially since, as you can see, it's relatively thin. So that's a bit of an issue. I would personally prefer if it was either thickened out to kind of a nail head point, or if it was rolled over in kind of a loop. That will make it much safer. The way it is, you would basically have to modify it to make it safe enough for sparring at least. Technique drills are fine with this, but more full contact, this is just not safe enough. But generally, if money is tight and you're looking for a historically accurate budget sword, those are pretty hard to find, this here really fits perfectly. I mean, it's very impressive, you get a lot of value for the money. Sure, it's not going to have the fit and finish of say an Arms and Armor or Albion sword, but in this price range, it's pretty damn hard to beat. And also very nice is that you can basically get the sharp version for not much more. If I remember correctly, Cult of Athena has the sharp blade for what, 95, I think, close to 100. And yeah, that means if you get that, you can have the blunt version for HEMA fencing, and you can have the sharp one for cutting tatami mats or whatever else. And of course it also means that if it does get very chewed up from practice, you can also just get a replacement blunt blade. So quite convenient, and yeah, this is just great value for the money. So in short, this thing rocks. Get one! Thanks for watching.
Here we have a gladius, a modern reproduction, but it's still a gladius. And the principal point I'm going to be making in this video is that this is a sword. Now, when people use the word gladius today, they generally mean specifically this kind of weapon, the sort of sword used by a Roman legionary, and it's often described as a short sword. Yes, it's shorter than a lot of other swords, but it's quite definitely sword length. This is not a dagger. I'm telling you now, I'm holding one, and this does not have the feel of a dagger at all. This is a sword. Now, the word gladius, back in the day, just meant sword. So the Latin for sword is gladius. So when a legionary referred to his sword, you know, he was referring to his sword, this thing. Now this one, this reproduction, has a blade length of 19.5 inches. Now a typical short sword of this design would actually have a blade of about 22 inches. So this one is actually about that much shorter than is typical, which is interesting when we start comparing this with other weapons at the time. So you see that overall length, it's the same length as this copis, or I call them, I say copis. Some people in my falsata video said, that's not a copis, it's a falcata. Yeah, if one of these is found in Spain and it's got a horse's head on the end of it, they call it a falcata. Otherwise, they're the same. Right. If we compare this with a Sparta, say this is the Roman longer sword, again, you know, the difference isn't enormous. So yes, it's shorter than some other swords, but it's not really all that short. Now, one factoid that I've heard repeated a few times is that until the development of the AK-47, more people were killed with this weapon than with any other weapon. That might be sort of true, but I take that with a hefty pinch of salt, because it's one of those facts that relies on an awful lot of assumptions, estimates, and convenient definitions. I would say that far more people would be killed by spears, so if you lump all spears together into the category spear, then it's probably the spear and then the AK-47. Right, so it's short-ish, but it's not that short. This is a legionary's chopping and thrusting weapon. You can see from the shape of the point that thrusting is definitely in mind, but it widens to here, and so you've got a definite chopping point here, so if anyone exposed a wrist or whatever, bang, you could definitely give him a pretty hefty clonk with it. Its shortness means that when you get in very, very close, you've got a lot of options for stabbing in all sorts of directions. If someone gets right up against me, perhaps he slams into my shield and pushes my shield right up against me, I can still bring my arm back far enough to get the point to play into any little chink that presents itself. I have heard it said that these would be held sideways in the hand like this, the stabbing between the ribs. Possibly sometimes, but I don't have any evidence to support that. It's an idea. So it must have been effective because they used them for an awful long time. It's a sword.
Unleash some Oriental fury with this crimson dueling dragon samurai katana sword. This elegant interpretation features a hand-forged carbon steel blade that measures in at a whopping 30 inches in length. The heavy blade is the main focus of the traditionally inspired sword, but it's the attention to fine details that keeps us coming back to this one. Ornate embellishments such as the brass habaki blade sleeve and intricately designed cast zinc alloy tsuba add tons of elegance and authenticity. Other details such as the antique finished Manuki handle ornament, ray skin and heavy cord wrappings dress this sword up and give it a custom designed look and feel at an unheard of price. True to its high-end finishes, this katana sword includes a matching hand-painted crimson red scabbard with coordinating accents to house the mighty blade. It has an imposing presence at 40.5 inches in overall length.